So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to our August local author night. My name is Julie. I'm the events manager at Roundabout Books. You would have probably seen me in person had you been able to come to some of our live events earlier this year or later last year. We do our local author night every other month or so while we can continue to meet with people. And I just wanted to remind everyone that this weekend is our end of the summer sale at the store. So if you're local and you want to pop by, we've got lots of fun books, hydro flasks, gift things on sale so that we can make room for our fall and holiday inventory. So we are open every day 10 to 4. You can always find us on the web at roundaboutbookshop.com, and our phone number is 541-306-6564. And with that out of the way, I'm really excited. We have 5 authors with us tonight who have a range of books to talk about. We are going to start tonight with Beth Wood. So real quick, I'm just going to mute everybody else. So, oops, not mute Beth. So Beth, I know that you have several books, so feel free, talk to us about the newest one, any of them. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm really happy that you're here.
Great, thank you so much, Julie, and thank you Roundabout Books for hosting this night. It's so great to be here with you all. It's not quite the same as in person, but it's really, really nice to see your faces. So I have 3 books of poetry, and I'll be reading mostly tonight from my second book called Ladder to the Light. And my new book is on the UPS truck on its way to my house right now. So I'm very excited for that. But thank you again for hosting. I thought this would be a good way to start. This poem is called Many Ways. There are many ways to begin, not just paper and pen, sometimes screen and puffy chair, soft blanket, warm coffee, old mug. Many ways to grieve, she says, and you reach back to recall the pulsing river of tears, the salted undercurrent of everything, even now, even when joy takes you over, when you laugh out loud, unbelieving, when pelicans in flight formation are just too magical to be true, their low dance of symmetry almost too much to bear. This water, these laughing children, sharp crackling sun, all of it on the head of a pin. There are many ways to begin. Thank you. I love the Zoom clap.
Right.
Thank you. Oh, I love any chance I get to geek out on poetry. And so most of my adult life I've spent as a touring singer-songwriter for my career, but I've also been a poet alongside that, and just started releasing poetry books a few years ago, and I'm having so much fun with it. So I often joke around with people at my shows that the only thing that's lower on the totem pole of commercial potential than folk singer is poet. So don't worry, Mom and Dad. So on that note, I'd like to share this poem called Retirement Plan. To have next to nothing is a relief at times, laughable at others. Things don't matter, people do, my grandmother would say, followed by, if I can't eat it, drink it, or rub it on, I don't want it. Amen. A hallelujah chorus running 3 generations back. Even from a rusty old chair on her dusty tumbleweed front porch, she knew if things do not serve us, we serve them. It's tricky that way, which is why I invest only in books of poetry now. Not the stock market, not the future. Only one of these is real. So I've met so many musicians and songwriters in my life as a touring artist that have inspired me and given me encouragement. And this next poem is for one of those artists. His name was Chuck Pyle, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And he was a cowboy poet. His nickname was the Zen Cowboy. And he had this big, shining, bald head that just seemed to radiate with joy and song. And so this is my tribute to him. It's called Cowboy Elegy. When the Zen cowboy opened his mouth, it was like whiskey and honey. Deeply worn saddle on a sure-footed chestnut, hoofing home from a long driving month, only 3 more miles to go. Around the spitting fire, we bathed in it, the warmth of his song. His right hand keeping its ever-steady gait, jaw and cheekbone rugged steep canyons, whimsy somewhere in his eyes, his bald crown lit up from the inside, singing for his supper and then some. Great song, kid, he said, and he tipped his hat in my direction, assuring me at last that I belonged. A tiny gift that lingers still, like the smell of wood smoke and warm horses. I guess he heard a dinner bell ring. We fell asleep, and now he's gone on home. Thank you. So there have also been so many poets that have inspired me in my life that I return to over and over again. And this poem is a tribute to them and how they just seem to appear just at that moment when I need them. This is called Forward Motion. The poets are at it again, scattering their careful whispers so that I will stumble upon them at the exact pinpoint moment of need, crushing desire, ache of new loneliness pressed up against the old. Oh, Stephen Dunn, oh, Lisa Rosen, what angels have you become to speak to me like this? What blind magic? The knowing hands you speak of, that raft tenderness, deep cry like a prayer. I am left with no choice but to believe, to sigh in wonder. What choice but to write on these scattered pages, stained by coffee and dust, to rise from another sleepless night, gather my awestruck heart into something a builder could use, and dare to never look back. Thank you.
So Beth, I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So I do understand that many people say that, you know, poetry doesn't sell, but I think that it does. And I think it always will. And is your poetry, or your books, I should say, do you notice themes? Like, does one book have a theme and then one will have a different one? Or are your poems more themselves the theme?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first book that I put out was more of kind of a collection of assorted poems that were all their own thing. And this book definitely has a theme and a sort of a story arc to it. I was inspired by a poem from Jane Hirschfield called Mule Heart. And this poem describes a time when she was in Greece and she was watching these mules with these giant heavy baskets of things try to balance and climb these hills. And so she made a comparison in this poem of how we balance joy and grief, and it's always a balancing act. And so this book in particular is based on that theme and goes from grief back to joy.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah.
And you said your new one is
The
due
new
to
one.
release any day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that
Yes.
cover.
Thank you. This is, it's called Believe the Bird, and that comes from a John James Audubon quote. He says, if the bird and the book disagree, believe the bird, which I've always loved. And this cover is from a photograph that my Aunt Sherry took. She's a hummingbird scientist, and this is a very close up of an Anna's hummingbird. So
Very cool.
yeah. Yeah, so this book kind of tackles the theme of the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that we believe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Well, so on that note, I'll read one, just a little preview from the new one, um, uh, also about another poet, inspired by a poet. It's called If Words Could Talk. How tempting to complain about wiry white hairs sprouting from my crown, to decry dry, brittle popping of knees, hips, the occasional ankle. How natural, if not somewhat cliche, to try and run harder, faster against the clock. How delicious to moan, my youth is over, under breath, while turning calendar pages. How brutal their neutrality, almost like they don't care. William Stafford's first book of poetry was published when he was 46. Shut up and write, those words say, and I do.
That's
So I'll
lovely.
go back. I'll go back to Ladder to the Light. This poem is called A Woman Will Stand and Sway. And it was inspired by a trip to the post office. And I was standing there in line behind about 8 different women of all ages and sizes. And they were all standing there going like this. And I noticed how natural that is of emotion for us women. So this poem came along. A woman will stand and sway, a gentle rocking with no boat and no water. Some ancient lullaby threaded through the metronome of hips. Pendulum of flesh to quiet the cries of babies never born, already born, not born quite yet. Her breast an offering even to a lover to fill the mouth, quench the thirst, pacify the restless animal living in his every cell. She will recognize pain without words, wrap herself around it, wrestle it to the ground, tender warrior. She needs no bullets, knives, drones. She absorbs them, unthreads the needle of violence done in the name of anyone, anything, and sews instead a warming quilt. She harvests the garden, hears faraway music often, and without warning, sees the child in us, each by each, humming a quiet tune underneath her breath for the broken ones.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
So if you have questions for Beth, make sure and hold on to them. We'll do those at the end of our time. And we're going to switch over to our gentleman of the night. So Bob, I'm going to unmute you. So Bob, you wrote a memoir basically about your high school time.
Well, it's not really technically a memoir.
Okay.
It's more of about 40 stories of me growing up in northeastern Oregon, in the small towns of like Enterprise and North Powder, places you probably have never visited. But I grew up there, and we were at church, and I got a jab in the ribs. Now, I got jabbed in the ribs quite often at church, but I got a jab in the ribs, and my wife was saying, Bob, there's a writing class starting at hospice, the Redmond Hospice. So I jumped in. They let me stay. I wasn't ready to pass on, and which, you know, some of them were there because they wanted to write their last story, and others were there to kind of accumulate their last stories. But they let me stay. Wasn't too long, I found I was writing for another writers group. So I had 2 writing groups I was writing for, and stories just started flowing, and one story led to another story. And eventually I accumulated about 40 of them that take place between the 1940, well, I was born in 39, so that's quite a ways back, but in the late 40s and up through 1957. And most of the stories are in the 50s. But everybody was saying, Bob, these stories are so unique. None of us got to do that. And they are unique. And they were a unique experience. And they were just a lot of fun. And we, you know, riding our bikes on Highway 30. This is before interstate, with 22s on our handlebars, riding out to the garbage dump. You know, 7th grade, 8th graders doing that, and folks not worrying about it. You know, it was a different time. It was a completely different time. But a lot of the stories most of them are very humorous. A few of them are really, really sad. I lost a brother during this time, and it's very sad. But it was a prize winner, and so I included it in the group of stories. And I thought I would read just part of one of the stories. Well, first, Julie, I should back up a bit and say thank you for having me, and thank you Roundabout for carrying my book. And I hope you sold some this week, because I had, you know, it's amazing. I had people that will tell me, Bob, I'm going to go buy that book, and I say, it's at Roundabout or Herringbone or wherever I say. They never show up. You know, I don't know what happens to them. They get swallowed up. But anyway, so I don't know if you, it's a book, April and My Classmates, and it's a garbage can on top of the flagpole in front of the school. And it says class of 57. And we figured out a way how to put that garbage can on top of the flagpole as we left for senior sneak day, and which we had a good time. Went all the way to Walla Walla, Washington for our senior sneak, but that was big. But it's just about 40 different stories that just kind of tell what my life was like, maybe what my parents were like, and what my classmates were like. And so I just want to read you one of them, part of one of them. And I make a big copy for myself so that I don't have to read the small print. In 1946, we moved to Arlington. Now, how many, have you ever been in Arlington, Oregon? Well, you've missed it. Now, it's on the Columbia River, but it's where I moved there in 46 was one place. Then they built the John Day Dam and covered Arlington. So everything that I experienced in Arlington is gone. They tore that whole part of the town was gone. And they moved the town about a half a mile. I had one friend that took a trip up there, didn't really understand that, took a trip to Arlington to see just exactly where we live. Well, it's under 500 feet of water, 300 feet of water. Anyway, all right. In 1946, we moved to Arlington, where Dad would teach and coach. We moved into a 2-story Victorian house with many rooms, such as a parlor, sitting room, dining room, den, library, and kitchen, interconnected with a hallway. The rooms were separated by sliding doors, with each room having 2 entrances. You might think of a clue on it. Each room had its own coal or wood-burning pot-belly stove. The bedrooms were upstairs with a central hallway. It had a large porch and set on a hill next to the school. In its prime, it must have been a grand house that overlooked Arlington. It was past its prime, way past. It had a small front yard with a rock wall cliff dropping off to the street below. Along the schoolhouse side were concrete steps leading to the school. There were 2 flights of about 20 steps connecting the 2 levels of town. We were led onto the property. The owner was ahead with my folks. I stepped out into the yard, probably pushing my siblings and maybe chasing them when I stopped and looked down at a pile of coins. Big coins, like silver dollar bigs, and a pile of them. I scooped them up, as many as I could hold. I ran to Dad to show him what I had found. "It's in the yard," I said. He looked at me sternly and told me to put them in my pocket, pick up any more, and shut up. I did. Only much later did I find out that that money provided the food we were going to eat the next month, before he would have been paid. As we talked about it later, we think it must have fallen from a concealed cache and forgotten when the previous renters moved out. The house quickly became our home until I came home from school and found my mother on the kitchen table screaming. She had seen a mouse, actually many mice. I don't remember where my siblings were, but I broke to get back to school to get Dad. He came quickly and diffused the situation. As the weather had begun to cool, the mice began to move in, and they must have had some form of communication. They all came to our place, or so it seemed. Dad began putting tin can lids over possible entry sites, and numerous traps were set every night and emptied every morning. It was bad. Dad could not keep up, but I could rescue Mom. When winter hit, we found out the old Victorian houses were not well insulated, perhaps not having any insulation. Our living quarters began to shrink. First, we closed off the upstairs, then each of the side rooms, and we're all in the dining room with our beds in the kitchen. We were kids, were having a great time. As the weather began to warm, we began to move out of the dining room into the parlor and the other rooms. We never moved back upstairs. The mice became less of a problem, and Mom did not have to be rescued every day. So and that's the way it kind of reads, you know. There's just accumulation of stories that were that people tell me that it's really easy to read. I have a lot of people tell me. In fact, you know, I self-published through Kindle, and I am almost to break even, even including the cost of my editor. I'm almost not, you know, I need to sell another maybe 50 books and I will have broken even. And, you know, I was doing this for fun. And so that's been pretty good. And I feel really good about that. And we're just, you know, the stories are similar stories, are floating down the North Powder River, four senior boys in a old military rubber raft floating down the North Powder River and doing things that we should have known better, but we survived. You know, we all survived. And then I'm now working on a project. It's a novel, and it's a novel called Grace. At this time, it's called Grace is Missing, and it's a mysterious young lady comes to a small school, 50 kids in this high school in Northeastern Oregon, and changes things all around. And I would like to read just a little introduction to the story. But one of the things that we have really found interesting, with my writing group, I've written this in first person. Sam, who is the hero, who is telling the story, he's carrying the story. But Grace, I had all these ideas for how to deal with Grace. What did she feel about moving into a small town with 50 kids in the high school? And so we debated this for a couple of weeks with one of my writing groups. And they said, Bob, why don't you create a diary? And so that's what I've done in this one, in this novel, is we have created Grace's diary. And like all girls' diaries that I know of, they had little sketches in them, and you know, because they didn't journal then. Because this is in the 50s. This is in the 50s, and they didn't journal. Nobody talked about journaling. It was diaries. They kept diaries. Girls kept diaries, and they had these pictures of stars or whatever they wanted to do. And but so I wanted to just kind of introduce Grace just a bit. There was a quiet knock at the door. The students' eyes moved to the door along with Mrs. Cook, our English teacher. The door quietly opened and our heads moved around, and a young lady stood in the doorway with a piece of paper in her hand. Mrs. Cook motioned her in up to her desk. The girl handed the piece of paper to Mrs. Cook. She looked it over, wrote something in her grade book, stood up by the young lady and said, "Class, I want to introduce you to Grace. As you know, she is new here and will be part of this junior class. I am sure most of you will be in other classes with Grace, so be sure to introduce yourself and make Grace welcome to Powder. Grace, why don't you sit over near April?" as she pointed to an empty desk in front of April. Grace was about the same height as April, who I knew was 5'6". She had straight, sandy colored hair that stopped just above her shoulders. She was very thin, almost as if she did not have enough to eat thin. The print flowers on her dress were very faded, but it looked very good on her. It didn't look as she had on any lipstick. Her lips were thin. Her nose tended to turn up just a bit at the end. Her cheekbones were thin and blended into it was covered by her hair. Her eyes were blue, the deepest blues I could imagine, and when she smiled, her eyes glistened. That day, I had 4 classes with Grace: Junior English, U.S. History, Advanced Math, and Speech. When I heard her speak, she didn't have to give a speech that day. The words just seemed to roll off her tongue, and it was so beautifully jilting and clear. I had not yet spoken to Grace, but I knew I would after school. I had talked to Aunt Betty, the school secretary, my Aunt Betty, school secretary, and she told me Grace lived out my way, just beyond on a place on Little Willow Creek Road. First I wondered, where on Little Creek Road? And Aunt Betty said, the old brown place, just a short hop beyond your place. The old brown place should have been burned down a couple of years ago. It's in terrible shape, I replied. Aunt Betty said, I know, but I understand they will live there and fix it up for Mr. Brown, who now lives in town in his new place. Grace's father will work for Mr. Brown. Well, that is good, I told my aunt. Maybe I can walk her home and even carry her books. Maybe I can even help her with her homework. Well, Sam, that would be very nice of you. Do I detect some hidden motive as to why you would want to walk her home, carry her books, and help her with homework? Lunch was a disaster. I had hoped to sit with Grace, but the senior boys were way ahead of me. I noticed she had not brought a sack lunch, nor did she purchase a lunch. I decided to keep an apple for after school, maybe give it to her as we walk home. I shouldn't have senior boys competition. They all had football practice. Class size seemed to move so slowly, but eventually school was out. I started looking for Grace just as soon as I got the stuff from my locker. She could have been assigned a locker next to mine, as it was empty, but no, it had to be somewhere else in the building. It did not take me long to find her at Powder. Only 50 high school students and the football players were heading for practice, except Jack. How could I forget Jack? And he's not playing football as his shoulder had been hurt in the last game. And Jack was standing right next to Grace, and it looked like he was planning to walk her home. My heart sunk. How could I forget Jack? The steps were broad coming down the front of the school. Grace and Jack were on the left side, and I was on the right. I held my apple in my hand about halfway down, and at a glance from Grace, underhanded lobbed the apple, yelling, "Think fast." Grace caught it like a pro baseball player, immediately took a bite and lobbed it back, yelling, "You think fast." I caught it after some juggling with the cat, took a bite, and this time handed it to her. "It's yours." "Thanks," Grace said. The three of us headed home, though Jack should take off on a couple of blocks in another direction. I was actually a few paces behind until Grace called out, "Sam, get up here with us." She knew my name. How did she know my name? Not hesitating, I quickly moved up beside her so she was in the middle. We discussed powder and the powder high as we walked along. And then it goes on, and we walk home, and they walk into we see her new house, and his dad is up fixing the roof of the new house, and Jack puts up the chimney, straightens up the chimney, or Sam straightens up the chimney and goes and then builds a fire. And of course, she comes out about the time, and it's 90 degrees in the house. He's built a fire. She has some words about that. But there's obvious a connection. And this is my her diary entry for that time. "Dear diary, my first day at school. Can you believe it? 50 students in the 4 years. 50. I didn't know there were schools so small. My largest class had 15 students. I will admit the teachers, the kids seemed very pleased that I was here. I walked home with a classmate, Sam. He lives in the house closest to us, about a half a mile from our place, as a crow flies, not by the lanes. He seemed very nice, and I noticed most of the class, especially the girls, liked Sam. Sarah and April, who kind of showed me around, really liked Sam. Jack, a senior, walked with Sam and I as he was recovering from a football injury. Otherwise, he would not be walking with us. Diary, you cannot believe this house we have moved in. I think the house had been deserted, and we have nothing to move in except a few cans of food and each a suitcase. How will anyone find us here? We could hardly find it. It must be sitting on the edge of the world. Last night, I could hear coyotes howling, and it was so dark. I swear I could hear mice running through the house, but I had no light to scare them away. The house doesn't even have electricity, nor does it have a bathroom. No bathroom. I have to go outdoors to an outhouse, but it is dried up and it doesn't smell terrible. But does it have spiders? How am I ever going to take a bath? After school, Sam came over to help his father to work on the roof. I know he was trying to help us when he lit a fire, and it must be 90 degrees in here. Of course, I had to open my mouth as to why he built a fire, and Sam was the one who gave me an apple when I was hungry. And all of them all of the diary entries end with something like this: "Mom, please take care." And so we know that something is wrong with Mom. We don't know what. Sam does not have a mother. There's just two fathers and the two young people. And it goes on and develops, and I'm working on the last 2 chapters, and she's going to be whisked out of the country as a spy.
Well, Bob, that sounds great, and I hope that when you get that one published, we can have you in the store again. And
I hope so too. I hope so too.
It's so nice to hear that your first book is doing well. You know, lots of people who self-publish, you know, that it's hard to get back what you put into it. So
it is. So I made many trips. I took a trip to North Powder. We went to Baker. We set up gigs there and sold books at reunions and sold books at bookstores. But it took some doing, you know. And in these towns that I lived in, we contacted them if they had a bookstore, and we pushed them books. Herringbone carries them. One of the sisters, Roundabout has it. You know, but it took some getting them out. It takes work to get them out there. You're right.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for being from both of those. we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Alicia now. And again, if you have questions for Bob, hold on to those until the end of the event. So let me switch over our mics. All right. So Alicia, you might have to press something. There we go. So thank you for joining us. And I can't wait to hear more about this book. So let's see here. It's called This Is Not a Sad Story. But there's a lot to that title. So take it away.
Well, thank you so much for hosting this, and also, like the other authors have said, for allowing us to be in the store. It's just a real blessing. And we self-published, and we use Maverick Publications. And so your store was one of the first places that we said, hey, we should see if some of the small businesses would carry it. And you guys were so gracious, because it was kind of scary going in there. But anyway, so this is our book. This is Not a Sad Story. And this is my daughter, Hayden. This is my other beautiful daughter, Chandler. And just a little bit about the book. What happened was when Hayden was just 21 years old, she got a little bump on her cheek. And she called me from college and said, Mom, you know, I have this little bump. And oh, Hayden, it's nothing. It's never anything. It'll go away. Well, with some time, it did not go away. One thing led to another. We ended up finding out that she had a very rare and aggressive form of skin cancer, usually found in elderly white men. And here she was, just this beautiful 21-year-old girl. So, of course, we were heartbroken when we found out about this. They said, this is a very serious cancer. You need to have already dealt with it. So the very first day I said, Hayden, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. You should journal, you know, your experience. And she's like, journaling? Ah, Mom, I would never journal. What a waste of time. If I'm going to go through this experience, if God's going to call me to do this, then I'm going to live it out for the world to see. And so the very first day that she got diagnosed, that's what that kid did. She sat down at the computer and she started a blog. And she wrote over 140 blogs before she passed away just a couple of years ago, November 7th. So her blog was hugely popular. It had been read in over 30 countries. It had been read by tens of thousands of people. And so many followers that she had kept saying, are you going to turn it into a book? And before she passed away, she said, Mom, you know, if you guys can turn it into a book, just to continue my story and my legacy and honor me, I think that that would be super awesome. So my daughter Chandler and I, we went through all the blogs and compiled it into this book. And like I said, took it over to Maverick Publications. Gary over there.
He's awesome.
Oh my gosh.
He was fantastic.
He was such a godsend and a blessing to us. And he's had a very strong following. And so we created a website called The People Mender. And it's sold, well, we just got 500 more. And so it's been over 2,000 copies and not coming up on a year yet. So we realize the huge blessing that it's been, but it has impacted just hundreds of people. We regularly get calls and texts and cards and things saying how inspiring her story has been and how much it helps people in their lives dealing with cancer, because it's just such a tough thing to go through. Most people will be touched in one way or another by cancer. So yeah, that's a little bit about Hade's story. She writes very honestly, very candidly. As we edited it, we added some punctuation in, but we really tried to keep her voice going. And so I thought that I would share a little bit so you could kind of get the flavor of her writing style. The book is, she doesn't journal every single day, but like I said, 140 blogs that she wrote. And so you can read it as her story from start to finish, and many people have done that. But you can also just pop it open and read the story and be challenged or encouraged in her writing. So she said, this was called Trial Signs. Well, I catch myself people watching more than ever, not in a creepy way. I just gaze out the window when we're driving or look around at various people in church, or at the grocery clerk ringing me up. I try to picture what their lives look like or what they could possibly be going through. I know if anyone were to look at me to see my family at church or out and about, the last thing they think is, wow, it looked like they're dealing with cancer. At least I'd like to think that's not what their initial thought was. It's made me realize that you never truly know what people are dealing with. And I'm going to skip some of it down to, like the other day, wow, people can be so annoying, rude, hurtful, needy, you name it. It took an extra dose of grace to be able to serve others when I worked in my retail job. The day that I was diagnosed with cancer, I went to a CVS pharmacy to pick up some pictures. The guy was so rude and snappy toward me. I really just wanted to say to him, oh yeah, and by the way, I just found out that I have cancer. Yeah, I hope you feel really good about the way you're treating me. Oh, but how many times did I get snappy with a customer or roll my eyes at the man at the bank who was taking forever to write his deposit slip? If we all walked around with a sign on our head saying, just lost my daughter, or just got evicted from my house, or my dad just got arrested, or I was just diagnosed with cancer, how different would we treat each other? Everyone has something going on. Everyone has something hard that they have to deal with, some kind of trial, big or small. How much better would I have felt had the guy at CVS taken an extra dose of patience with his breakfast and treated me with warmth and kindness? I'm convicted, you guys. It's a commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. It's not easy to do. I want to think about my interactions with people. I want to be the 1% girl, the 1%, the small percent of people that will be that one that made the person forget about their trial, even just for 1 minute. And so her blogs go on, and thank you so much. You know, she just shares candidly the good, the bad, the ugly, the heartbreak, the annoyance, what it's like to deal with cancer. She had 3 major surgeries, but like this picture here, for example, she had an 11-hour neck dissection to remove this cancer. They removed 80 lymph nodes from her neck. But she still had the stitches in, and her cousin took this picture and said, hey, let's go out and do a photo shoot with you. And I mean, who does that? You know, you just had an 11-hour surgery. There's still dried blood, you know, on it. But she said, yeah, I'm going to use this story for God's glory and for the good of people. So yeah, let's do it. So we knew that we just had to have this as the cover. And I just wanted to let Chandler share a little bit. Like I said, so many people have reached out to us about the huge impact that Hade's story has had on their life. We have sent her book to Ethiopia, to Italy, to Spain, all across the United States. And we've just been inundated by so many kind and positive things that we had to include them in, I think it was the third printing of the book. So she's going to share a couple of the things that people have to say.
Yeah, no, it's been very encouraging. And I think even past being encouraged as either if you're a cancer survivor or know someone with cancer, I think you can be encouraged just with day-to-day life. We're all facing something, if it's not cancer, if it's divorce or loss or whatever it is. I feel like we can all glean something from it. And so the first one that I want to read comes from Maureen, and she was just such a huge blessing in our lives, and I know Hayden really touched her. And so she writes, Hayden had a God-given gift of expressing her thoughts and feelings in such a raw and authentic way. Even though I never met Hayden, I felt connected to her. Every time I might be having a small pity party kind of day, here would come one of Hayden's new blogs, and wow, her words would bring me back to reality and gratitude. And I know just from the experience of watching Hayden as my sister go through such a rough season of life. If I ever felt like complaining or ever felt like, well, I had a really hard life and I had a really hard day, so I just need to vent to you. Hayden would always allow me to do that. But then if I ever stopped and thought for a moment, like, okay, if we kind of compare situations and I just take in all the things you're going through, it really helps pull me out of my pity party kind of day. You know, like, I just think that's helpful to start your day with a little wake up call sometimes, you know. One more that I wanted to share. This comes from Sarah. I'm about 2/3 done with the book. It is beautiful, inspiring, and the greatest example of selflessness, integrity, honesty, and courage. I'm so glad I got the book and will be passing it to a few friends. Thank you. And to see the lives touched by Hayden is such a beautiful blessing. And there's a bunch of them in there like that, but yeah, it's just a very encouraging thing to read and to hear from people. So
yeah, we don't always get to see what God is doing in our trials, but with Hayden's blog, we kind of get a little peek behind the curtain in just how God is using it all over the world to encourage and inspire people. And I wanted to also share that she writes about her journey. She was 21 when she got diagnosed. She actually ended up getting married in that the time, but she was 24 when she passed away. Anyway, she married a young man named Adam, and so they got to have a little over a year of married life together. They did many courageous and bold things, which she shares in her book. She talks about being a newlywed, everything from burning chicken, crying over, eggs, and feeling sad about having to leave the planet as she realizes, that the Lord is not going to heal her. For her husband's 30th birthday, he loved this rapper named Lecrae. And so they traveled down to Sacramento to watch his concert. They actually got to meet him and have a wonderful conversation with him about how inspirational his music had been. Of course, we didn't know that was going to be pretty much her last day. So I wanted to read, do I have time to read her last blog here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it.
Okay, all right. So what happened was on November 5th, they traveled down to Sacramento to see the concert. She wrote this blog on November 3rd, and then she passed away on November 7th. So she lived an amazing life right up until the very end. And she says, I've been kind of in a dry couple of weeks. By dry, if I'm honest, I mean I've been trying to ignore God. I've been staying distracted and really kind of lazy. Spiritually, I haven't wanted to grow or be convicted or put in the effort with God. I've been hiding behind the simple distractions in life and the excuse of being weary from cancer. But God won't let you stay there, no sir. That tugging at your heart, that conviction you feel when you're looking at Netflix to comfort you when you know you should crack open your Bible. It's more work, sure. It's not instantly mind-numbing or gratifying, but it is the better way. It's hard for me during this season of cancer. I'm doing chemo, and while it's buying me time, it's not curing me. It's just palliative. It's a stepping stone before my death. The cycle is difficult to navigate. You get chemo, and it makes you sick for the first 2 weeks. Then you have a 1 week window when your tumors are smaller and you don't have the side effects of chemo, so you feel almost normal, then bam. Tumors are hard and angry and growing again, and you're reminded of your permanent state to come once the chemo stops working, which could be any day now. Once chemo stops working, that's it, outside of a miracle. So it's been strange, and I've tried to numb the confusion and anxiety and all of it's distracting by myself and to stay in a form of denial. But here's the reality. Last week, I planned my funeral, literally. Adam, her husband, and I went to the funeral home, and I picked out a coffin. I picked out a funeral package. I answered the questions. Do you want to be refrigerated or embalmed? You want a viewing? You want to be buried or cremated? I even went outside to pick out a plot of land that I will eventually be buried at. Heck, I even picked out what kind of design I want on my gravestone. I planned my funeral. Now, most of you will never plan your funeral. For some of you, it will be because you had an unexpected death. Some of you will just avoid it going altogether. It seems gruesome, it sounds depressing, and it seems unnatural. That's not exactly wrong. I sat there staring at the various coffins on the wall, and as I walked out past Here Lies Dear Old Dad and Our Angel, I stopped at the little plot of land under the tree. I stared at the blank space that will eventually say Hayden Palm. I imagined my loved ones coming to lay flowers on the gravestone that I picked out. Imagine that the tears that they would fall on the stone. I imagined Adam standing under the shade of the tree telling me about his life. But most of all, I imagined the despair and sickness I would feel if I stared at that plot of land and thought, this is it. All that I would end up being after 24 years of life would be a pile of bones under a gravestone near a tree. What a bleak and bitter end. What hopelessness, and how depressing. I too would avoid planning my funeral if I was just planning on becoming dirt. Instead, I have a greater hope that is far beyond it. That plot of land is not my forever home. My home to come is far better than anything I will ever be able to imagine. And because of that, I was able to stand there under the shade of the tree, holding my husband's hand next to my grave, and thank Jesus.
Wow, that's wow. And you guys have, she lives on in this book. And I have to tell you, I've had people come into the store, obviously before everything, the pandemic, and they were, oh, that's Hayden's book. And they recognized it. And that was so lovely. And I had said, we're going to have her mom in. So, if again, like I said, this will be on YouTube, so hopefully people can check it out. But I so appreciate you sharing that with us and just sharing her in this way. That's lovely.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening and the opportunity to share.
Yeah.
Well,
so we're gonna move on to Lauren. And Lauren, you have a book that has one of my absolute favorite titles ever. It is It'll Be Fine, Right? Everyday Stories from an Elderly Millennial. So I'm going to just pass it over to you because I cannot wait to hear about what inspired you to write this book and more.
Thank you. Well, thanks. Like everyone said, thanks so much for doing this. This story came about kind of accidentally, this book. I like to write. I've always liked to write, and I've always kept diaries that turned into a blog. And I suddenly realized that I had 30 plus blog entries. And so it really was not a book about making any money. I look today and I've sold 49 copies in a year and a half. So it's not killing it by any means. But it was a personal challenge to see if I could do it. And part of the challenge is that the stories are vulnerable to a degree. Talking about real emotions, dealing with anxiety and panic attacks and issues with diet and relationships and friendships. And I think that my favorite thing about writing, aside from the actual writing process, is when someone else feels a little bit less alone and a little bit less weird because of something I wrote. And that has always been my favorite part, is getting a message from someone that's like, oh my God, I am a lawyer now and I have panic attacks too. And so that's been really amazing to put this book out into the world. It felt like a personal diary and get nice, I mean, mostly my parents bought copies, but to hear nice things from people about it. So, and I'm also in the process of writing a new one that's kind of lengthier blog posts turned into a book as well, a little bit more thought out. So this one I'm going to read to you is when I was in Bend. I don't live in Bend anymore. I live in Boise, Idaho. When I lived at Bend, I worked at the TV station as a reporter and producer. And I think that in the last few years, there's a lot of reporters, journalists have been given a pretty hard time about what they do. And it's not an easy job. Most of the people are young people just trying to do their job and get paid pretty poorly. And so I have a story that I'm going to read and then maybe get to the other one from my upcoming book. And this one is called I'm a TV news reporter, and this is what it's really like. It's not all live shots and lipstick. Okay. Words like fatal, overdose, suicide, missing, critical condition, crash, fire, accident, shot dead, serious injuries, and trauma are thrown around the room that I spend the vast majority of my day in without a second thought as to what they really mean and who they really involve. Because if we, millennial television journalists, took too many seconds to think about it, the answer would be kids, mothers, fathers, sisters, grandpas, grandmas, babies, uncles, aunts, friends, brothers. Now, I know all of you big market, big name journalists with loads of free time and between deadlines are reading this little buried story right now thinking, she ain't seen nothing yet. And you would be right. War correspondents and international reporters and basically anyone in a market larger than 186 is seeing scarier stuff than myself. But we all start somewhere, and scary is relative. See, journalists, reporters, media, local news are made of an interesting bunch of people who are frequently put in situations that our schooling did not prepare us for. We hear about a crash on the police scanner, show up to the crash, see the feet of the kid killed in the crash, interview the cops about the crash, watch the family of the kid who died in the crash arrive, interview the mother of the kid who died in the crash, eventually do a story on the funeral of the kid who died in the crash, and then go to the court date of the person at fault for the crash that killed the kid. And then we go home with no clue as to how to process the day. We're not police, sheriff's deputies, firefighters, medics, grief counselors, hospital staff. We're expected to be fine, simply because we were kept behind the caution tape with a video camera in between us and death. And I think mostly we are maybe kind of fine. It's just that each story hits each person in the newsroom a bit differently. The dead hoarding grandma may have a profound impact on the 5 p.m. producer, but not be a blip on the radar of anyone else in the room. In college, there was a journalistic ethics class, and we discussed whether or not suicide is a story to be aired. It's not, unless, of course, it's blocked traffic. What we did not learn was how to talk about the number of suicide calls heard over the police scanner overnight. And I think that's a shame, because more than once I've been in an empty newsroom at 2 a.m. producing a cheery morning show when someone not far away from me killed themselves. And there was nothing I could do about it except listen to the scanner chatter between police and fire and continue to write scripts about turtle races and standing desks. Again, for big-time journalists reading this and shaking their heads, I get it. This is nothing new. Journalists have been dealing with ugliness for forever. But that doesn't mean making jokes out of dead bodies to lighten the atmosphere isn't difficult and confusing. A newsroom is impressive, and it has this we're all in this together attitude that makes it okay and bearable. It's only when you go home and the adrenaline rush disappears and the deadline is gone that what happens in the day settles in and sits on your chest like the body of a transient found downtown by the railroad tracks earlier that day. It's heartbreaking, but we move on because the news does too. No sense or time to dwell on yesterday's sob story because there is a new one today. So that is more of one of the like depressing stories in my book. Just about that. It's a hard job, and there's still people doing it in Bend and all over the country that work in these tiny little newsrooms and have to deal with things that they're not designed to deal with. If we have time, I think I'm talking pretty fast probably.
Yeah, you're good. You can read more.
So I'm working on another book that, like I said, I would like the chapters. In this book that I have here, they're pretty short chapters, pretty small essays. I'm working on another one that I would like them to be a little lengthier. And I was in a writing group, and that was kind of the challenge to lengthen out your book or your article. So this is one about quarantine that I wrote back in April or so, when quarantine and coronavirus was kind of really kicking off and becoming a big deal. Okay. And it's called My Relationship Status with Quarantine is Complicated. A girl walked by me while chatting with her friend. I overheard her say, "I love it. I'm not forced to hang out with anyone that I don't want to hang out with." She was talking about the coronavirus and the quarantine orders that followed suit. And I wonder if a similar sentiment is echoing around the world. Certainly we miss our friends and our family, but is it possible that simultaneously we are actually enjoying these weeks to turn to months that have all but eliminated the word should from our vocabulary? I should make plans with a friend. I should join that meetup group. I should online date. I should go out tonight instead of watching Netflix. I should show face at that party. I should join coworkers for happy hour. I should stay until the bridal shower ends. I should join the soccer team. I should go out for drinks again, even though I don't really want to. The coronavirus has given us a permission slip to say no to social events only because there's no other option. It brings to mind my childhood. If I were asked to attend an event, i.e. a birthday party, but had a strong inclination to not attend, I would on occasion lie. I would tell the asking party that my parents said no. I was blame-free in my declination because my parents had insisted I not intend, and I was happy. The stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders are necessary and terrible, and there's a good chance folks are having a mental breakdowns at a rate we'll only realize when this comes to pass. The economic toll is nearly incomprehensible and certainly reeks of recession, if not depression, with nearly 22 million people having filed for unemployment. There's a frightening disease running rampant that's killing people at a tremendous rate, and it's truly scary. So I write this not to showcase some silver lining, because in a global pandemic, any silver lining pales in contrast to the dark cloud it's attached to. Rather, I write this to remember what quarantine felt like for me. I write this so that one day, future me knows what it felt like to be trapped at home. Dear future me, this quarantine coronavirus life is a roller coaster, dipping from awful to soul-sucking to absolute and total freedom. I think future me will be really pleased that past me took the time to document how she feels. There's been a comparison by society that accurately explains what quarantine feels like. It goes like this: every day feels like a Sunday, Monday morning feels like a Sunday afternoon, Friday night feels like a Sunday afternoon, Wednesday at 5 feels like a Sunday afternoon. For me, this blurring of time results in a real sense of panic at the absolute monotony and emptiness of life. When I think too deeply, right now for instance, that feeling settles on my chest like a warning. A therapist would likely label this feeling as anxiety. It feels like we've ripped the covers off the bed of life to reveal her full, naked, and imperfect self. The covers that now lay on the floor contain the weddings and barbecues and vacations and happy hours and gym classes and lectures and shopping and coffee shops and date nights. Those now cold blankets hold the nights out, live music, hikes with friends, funerals, farmers market, chats in the checkout line, awkward staff meetings, birthing plans, bachelorette parties, family reunions, and goodbye hugs. And it makes me wonder, what is life without her things? As she lays there shivering, trying to reach for the blankets, every time she gets close, they're pulled a little further away. So she and we lay back down to count sheep and fall asleep, hoping that everything will be okay when the sun comes up in the morning. Life has changed her look, and she's hard to recognize now. So that goes on. Anyway, that's part of the new book. But my goal, like I said, is to write stories that people can relate to, and I think there's a lot of unspoken things that people are dealing with, that when you have that great feeling when someone tells you they're going through the exact same thing you do, that's the feeling I want others to have when they read my writing. That's all.
I can't wait to see the title for the next one, but I have to say that when I first found your book on the shelf, I took a picture of it and sent it to my friend, and she's like, I feel like that title is your life. And I was like, I think it might be. And it's interesting that you say television reporters and reporters in general, journalists, and we don't think about it. My dad was a sheriff's deputy here in town for 35 years, and obviously we think about them going to these crash scenes and seeing really awful things, but I have to say, you're right, I'm not sure I ever thought about the journalists in that setting. So that's something really, I appreciate you bringing that kind of to light, to realize that they're bombarded with kind of horrible news on a daily basis.
Yeah, so, it's not expected, and it's something that sticks with you, seeing these things.
Yeah.
To get close to a crime scene.
Well, I'm glad you can kind of write about it too. I think, we all kind of see writing can be cathartic, and hopefully reading yours is as well. So thank you so much for presenting on that. Let's turn it over to Denise, and see here. Oh, you're already unmuted. Perfect. So Denise, your book, Why the Undocumented Belong to America, is more timely than ever, especially with what has been going on in Bend. So I'm throw it over to you, because I think you have a lot to say about this topic. So I'm happy to hear about it.
Okay, thank you. Till a few weeks ago, I had no idea there was so much support in Central Oregon for undocumented immigrants. Most of you know on August 12th, 2 ICE agents showed up to arrest 2 men in Bend for immigration violations. Dozens of local people heard what was happening, came down, surrounded the ICE buses, and more people joined them, trying to prevent them from taking 2 local men away from their families. By evening, the crowd had swelled to more than 200 people, and finally, armed Border Patrol agents with pepper spray arrived to break up the crowd, plow a pathway to the buses, take the men off and into custody. Wow, I moved here to Redmond from Tucson, Arizona, just over 2 years ago. And there I volunteered with one of several pro-immigrant organizations. And I'm just really grateful to see Central Oregonians rally to defend hardworking immigrants because they believe, as I do, that these undocumented people belong to America. Two people inspired me to write this book. The first one was Rosa Robles Loreto, a Mexican mother who took sanctuary in my church in Tucson in 2014 and 15 for 15 months until her deportation order was lifted. The second person was Donald Trump. Because I thought, if the people who believe all the mean things that Trump says about immigrants, especially from Mexico, if these people could just sit down with Rosa and her family, it would open their eyes. They could have a conversation about the things that were important to them. And these Americans would discover that these immigrants embody the values of hard work and family and faith, and I think it would make a huge difference. I don't think it's likely that these folks are going to get together. So I thought maybe people can read, sorry, there are dogs in the background. What if people could meet Rosa in a book? What if they could learn to understand her experience? So I used Rosa's story to illustrate the dilemma of 11 million people who contribute, labor, pay taxes, and help shore up our social security system, but live on shaky legal ground in our country. Most of our ancestors came here from somewhere else. I mean, if you're not Native American, then you're basically an immigrant. Many of them were desperate and poor. But our country gave these mostly European immigrants a way to work their way up to a better life. Not now, not for the immigrants coming now. Why the undocumented belong to America is essentially an argument for a new legalization program. We haven't had any way for people to legalize their status since the 1986 Immigration and Reform and Control Act. That law allowed 2.7 million people to become lawful permanent residents, and many went on to become US citizens. Why can't we do this again? Instead, many Americans demonize undocumented immigrants for the crime of crossing the border without permission, for coming here to perform the dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs that Americans don't want to do. Once you describe a person as an illegal alien, then you can justify taking away some of their human rights. This happens routinely to people in Border Patrol and ICE custody, and in the private prisons where immigrants are held in substandard conditions. And since this action and band involved deportations, I wanted to read part of my chapter called Deportation Wreaks Havoc with the Lives of Immigrants. But not just the immigrants, but all their family members who may be lawful permanent residents, or in many cases, US citizens. Deportation, the fate Rosa Robles Loreto sought to avoid, slams the door on an immigrant's life in the United States. It becomes a one-way ticket to the country next door or a flight to a more distant country of origin. Those apprehended by the Border Patrol may be sent across the border with only their clothes, and if they're lucky, what they were carrying with them. At the Comedor in Nogales, Sonora, a dining hall run by Jesuit priests and the Missionary Sisters of the Eucharist of the Kino Border Initiative, recent deportees find a warm welcome, 2 meals a day, and donated clothing. But the assistance is usually limited to 15 days. Behind them is another busload of people dropped off with few belongings and many needs. Most deportees are recent border crossers, said David Hill, a volunteer in Nogales since 2008 with the organization No More Deaths, located in Tucson. But he meets people in their 20s who grew up in the United States and speak English than they speak Spanish, he said. And people in their 50s and 60s, quote, who have lived so long in the US they can't remember anyplace else. Dorothy Cheo, a volunteer with Tucson Samaritans, a desert aid group, and No More Deaths, has met many deportees in Nogales, Sonora with deep roots in the United States. They're devastated, Cheo said. They have no idea what they're going to do. Because they can't travel to Mexico to visit relatives, undocumented immigrants in the United States might not have maintained family ties, Cheo said. This means they may have no one in Mexico to help them after deportation. Cheo coordinates volunteers who drive from Tucson to Nogales, Arizona, and walk across the border to the Comedor to offer first aid and free phone calls to deportees. In the fall of 2014, shortly after President Obama issued an executive order to shield parents of US citizens from deportation, now on hold in federal court, Cheo met a man who had lived in Kingman, Arizona for more than 20 years. Stopped by a traffic officer, he was eventually deported, leaving his US citizen wife and 2 US-born teenagers behind. He was trying so hard to be macho and not cry, Cheo said. He told her he had a clean record in the United States with no arrests or traffic violations. Some immigrants try to adjust their legal status through marriage, but a new law changes that. In a chapter called How the 1996 Immigration Law Divides Families. If the 1986 immigration law was a warm embrace for many undocumented immigrants, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996 was a cold slap in the face. Ironically, Republican President Ronald Reagan signed the 1986 bill into law, but the putative 1996 bill, which contained several reforms, passed under a Democratic president, Bill Clinton. One of the provisions of the 1996 law turned a time-honored tradition on its head. No longer would marriage to a US citizen automatically offer a ticket to legal residency in the United States for an undocumented immigrant. In Section 301, the law erected a 3-year bar to legal residency for any foreign national who had resided unlawfully in the United States for more than 180 days, but less than 1 year. But if the immigrant had stayed unlawfully for more than a year, which is the case for the majority of undocumented people, then the penalty was a 10-year bar to reentry. The law granted only a few exceptions for minors, asylum seekers, and victims of domestic abuse. Many couples learned the hard way. In the mountain village of Leavenworth, Washington, mechanic Cody Higgins fell in love with a Mexican woman who served him lunch every day at the Burger King drive-through window. In 2001, he asked her to marry him. Teresa de Jesus Jimenez was intent on working when she traveled from Oaxaca, Mexico in 1997, crossed the border without papers, and found 2 jobs in the Bavarian-themed tourist town. She owed medical bills from her late husband's illness and needed school supplies for her 3 children so they continue past 6th grade. She never imagined she would find love again. After their wedding, Cody petitioned the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, which is the precursor to ICE and CPB, for legal status for his wife. In 2003, the couple traveled to the American consulate in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, for Teresa's final interview. They carried letters of praise from Teresa's employers in Leavenworth. As they sat in the office, nervous but hopeful, a consular official delivered the worst possible news. Teresa was not eligible for legal residency because she had lived in the United States for more than a year, left to visit her children, and then re-entered the country illegally. He confiscated her Washington driver's license and told her she was barred from the United States for 10 years. Teresa went back to her parents' home in Oaxaca, and Cody returned to Washington, heartbroken. He sought help from his congressman and a lawyer without success. In 2004, he showed up at the Wenatchee World, where I worked as the family and faith reporter. He gave me Teresa's phone number in Oaxaca, and I interviewed her as well. What is happening to Cody and me is an injustice, Teresa told me. She desperately wanted to return to Washington with her children so we can be a family. Cody told me he visited his wife in Oaxaca and realized he could never support the family if he worked there as a mechanic. So he returned home to his auto repair shop in Washington. The only reason I get up in the morning is to get my wife back, he said. In August 2004, we published the story about the couple's dilemma with their wedding photo and a sidebar about how the 10-year bar in the United States affected other couples. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. I wasn't aware that those two, the 86 and 96 laws, and kind of the interesting facts of it doesn't always matter what the president's political party is, but yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions. Let me switch so I can see everybody. So if you have a question, raise your hand, I can unmute you, and then you can ask it of any of the authors. Let's see. I think everyone did such a, oh, hi, yes, Cecilia, hold on. Okay, go ahead. Oh, I can't hear you, hold on. There we go.
I am in Tucson and I'm a friend of Denise. Thank you, Denise, for inviting me. And I visit immigrants in detention. Immigrants, when they ask for asylum at the border, they are immediately put in prison. There's mandatory incarceration for asylum seekers. So we have a program where we visit them. One of the jails is called La Palma, about 55 minutes from Tucson. And there is a man there. I have 11 men that I write letters to now because we can't visit. One man has written the story of his immigration journey, and he says it's amazing. And the other guys there say that it is. And he wants me to find out how he could publish it. That's why I'm bringing it up to all of you.
Yeah, I mean, Denise, you're traditionally published or you're self-published? Oh, hold on. There we go.
I self-published my book through CreateSpace.
Okay.
I wish I had tried harder to find a publisher. CreateSpace has kind of morphed into Kindle. It doesn't exist as a separate entity anymore. I published in 2017. I don't know if that's the best way to go. If you can find a traditional publisher, that's better, but it's faster to get it done self-published, but it's costly.
But how do you find a publisher?
Celia, there's a couple different ways. There's actually something called the Publishers Marketplace, and it's a website that you can go to, and you can kind of find agents who specialize in, you know, if they do fiction or nonfiction or something like that. You might check with maybe some of your local writing groups too, just to see who else has been published.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, publishing is going through a lot right now. They're kind of being held up because of the coronavirus. You know, not everything's getting published like it was. But self-publishing is doing just as good, if not better, and people are publishing really great books and people are buying them. So it's, okay, you know, it's something to think about both sides.
And what is your organization, Julie, or your place?
So I'm with Roundabout Books as the events manager, and I'm also a book editor. So I do have a little bit of experience with people getting their books published. You can actually find my email on our website. So yeah, go ahead, feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat with you more about that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I actually see one of our authors for an upcoming event in the chat. Hi, Kelsey. And her book is kind of on the similar line as Denise's. So that's going to be really great. We have that coming up on September 11th.
I had one more, Cecilia, just one more idea that ended up working for me. I decided I did want to traditionally publish for my book, which is about immigration as well. And so Denise, it's so great to hear about your book and hear your reading and the way in which you integrate policy. I had luck. What I started doing is just reading a lot of books around immigration or social justice related themes, looking at the acknowledgments and then pitching their agent or their small press. And that's what eventually came through.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we have any questions for any of our other authors? I think everybody did such a great job about explaining their books too. So
I just want to say I thoroughly enjoyed it from everybody. Everybody's story was so different. It was just very enlightening.
Yeah, we had a diverse group. Bob, you had your hand up?
Well, yes, I would compliment Alicia. How you can read your story, your daughter's story. You know, I was amazed as to how well you could read the story.
Now go ahead and say the rest of it.
No, I was amazed at how well you could read it and maintain composure, and it was great. I was outstanding.
Okay.
It's my kid, and you know,
The ones who will read
and you want to share her story, but thank you for the kind words. Sometimes I do cry a lot.
It was great. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. You know, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to support these local authors. And again, to support our independent bookstores. Saturday, tomorrow, is Independent Bookstore Day. It usually happens in April, but it was postponed. So wherever you are, please go visit one of your local independent bookstores. We need to keep them in business, and I love the one that I work at. So come and see us this weekend. And if you know someone who wasn't able to attend tonight but would want to maybe hear about one of these books, please refer them to the Roundabout Books YouTube channel. So I'll get this posted up there sometime this weekend. But again, thank you everyone for coming tonight and spending time on Zoom, which I'm sure you all are all doing very much of right now. Yeah. So, all right. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye, Bob.
Thank you all.